Ava Thompson signed her name for the 12th time and watched it become less like a person and more like a permission slip. The paper beneath her hand was thick, cream, expensive enough to suggest permanence, and each looping A looked steadier than she felt. From the open casement of the bridal suite above Greycliff Vineyard's old bottling hall came the mixed scent of crushed grape skins, beeswax polish, and the starch of freshly pressed linen laid out for tomorrow's rehearsal. Her wedding gown hung from a carved walnut screen like a second woman waiting in patience. On the table beside her sat 3 documents: the marriage settlement, the share transfer, and the household agreement that would move her from her mother's authority to Julian Mercer's with the smoothness of a legal stitch. Down in the courtyard, men called measurements to one another as casks were rolled into place. Their voices rose and fell in practical rhythm, indifferent to ceremony. Above them, Ava held a silver nib between fingers that had learned stillness as a discipline, and wrote her name again. A short knock sounded, then another, exactly 2 beats apart. Mrs. Hart, her mother's senior maid, entered without waiting to be invited, carrying a tray with tea gone pale from standing and 2 dry biscuits arranged as if appetite might be instructed by geometry. Lady Celia asks whether the first pages are complete, Mrs. Hart said. Her tone held neither curiosity nor malice. It held procedure. Ava set the pen down with care. Please tell my mother they are nearly complete. Mrs. Hart's gaze dipped to the documents, then to Ava's untouched tea. You are expected in the blue drawing room at 11. Mr. Mercer's solicitor arrives at 1:15. I am aware. Mrs. Hart inclined her head and withdrew, closing the door quietly behind her. Even the click of the latch sounded practiced. Ava waited until the footfalls had faded along the corridor before she moved. She crossed to the wardrobe, opened the lower drawer and touched the strap of the single travel bag hidden beneath folded shawls. It was packed. 2 plain dresses, 1 warm petticoat, her father's old prayer book, a comb and the little coin purse she had been filling 1 shilling at a time from small economies. No one had noticed because no one expected resistance in small denominations. She shut the drawer and returned to the writing table. She had made the irreversible decision 2 nights ago in the same room, after hearing her mother and Julian speak through the thin partition that separated courtesy from intent. Not shouting, not even arguing. Their voices had been calm in the way stone is calm. She will sign, Celia had said, as if discussing weather expected by season. Julian had answered, I require no dramatics from her. Compliance is sufficient. Since then, the house had continued as if nothing at all had changed. Breakfast at 8, dress fitting at 9:30, correspondence reviewed before noon. No letter reached Ava's hand uninspected. Envelopes arrived already opened, then resealed with a neat press of wax that bore her mother's crest, not hers. Invitations were accepted on Ava's behalf. Replies were drafted for her and left for her signature with little marks in pencil where her pen should land. Choice had not been denied in dramatic scenes. It had been scheduled out of existence. By 10:30, she descended the back staircase to the blue drawing room, where sunlight struck the ormolu clock and made it look hotter than the fire. Celia Thompson stood near the mantel in dove-grey silk, pearls at her throat, one hand resting lightly on the marble as if she owned even the angle at which she leaned. Her beauty had narrowed with age into something severe and exact. Her eyes were pale and clear, the colour of winter sky over water, and in them Ava often saw not dislike, but assessment, which felt colder. You are 3 minutes late, Celia said. The seamstress delayed me. Then dismiss her after the wedding. Sit. Ava sat. The solicitor, Mr. Penrose, arranged his papers with reverent fingers. Julian Mercer stood at the far window, one shoulder turned toward them, his reflection caught in the glass alongside the vineyards climbing the slope beyond. He was handsome by any ordinary measure and aware of it only as one is aware of owning a reliable carriage. He had no need to perform charm where certainty would do. Mr. Penrose cleared his throat. "Miss Thompson, if we proceed to Clause 14, we may conclude the morning review in efficient order." "Proceed," Celia said before Ava could answer. The solicitor read in a monotone that made transfer sound like ritual. Dowry shares consolidated into Mercer Holdings upon solemnization. Residence at a property selected by the husband. Disbursement allowance reviewed quarterly by the husband's office. Visiting rights at maternal discretion during the first year. The language was meticulous, polished by precedent until no rough edge remained for a woman to catch her hand upon before she bled. Ava listened, then said, "Clause 14. Subparagraph 2 states that my shares move before the marriage is complete." Celia's gaze shifted, cool and direct. "As security?" "For whom?" "For the future household," Celia said. "Do not be rhetorical, Ava." Julian turned from the window. "Miss Thompson, I assure you all terms are standard." "Standard for whom, Mr. Mercer?" His mouth altered by less than a smile. "For prudent families." Celia intervened with the mildness she reserved for moments she intended to win without noise. "Security is preferable to sentiment. Your father left obligations. I am resolving them. You will assist." There it was, always there, polished and brought out when needed. Your father's debts, your mother's sacrifice, your duty made indistinguishable from gratitude. Ava felt the small muscle in her jaw tighten, then release. She folded her hands in her lap so no one could see the tendons stand out. Mr. Penrose slid a page toward her and placed the pen beside it, nib angled for convenience. "Merely initials at the margin, miss." Ava did not pick up the pen at once. "I will read it again in full this afternoon." Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Celia did not raise her voice. She never did. "You will sign at 4, Celia said. "Read it then, if reading soothes you." Ava met her mother's eyes. "As you wish." The phrase tasted of iron. When the meeting ended, Celia and Julian departed for a luncheon with neighbouring landholders, leaving the house to the soft tyranny of staff routines. Ava was directed to the fitting room, where Madame Fournier pinned lace at her shoulders while speaking to the mirror rather than to Ava herself. "Your mother insists the neckline must suggest modesty and value at once," the dressmaker said in accented precision. A difficult brief, but not unprecedented. Ava stood on the raised platform with her arms slightly lifted, muscles burning in stillness. Pins flashed in and out of ivory fabric. Through the open transom she could hear the clatter of crates in the bottling hall below, and once, briefly, the laughter of cellar boys before a foreman hushed them. Madame stepped back, narrowed her eyes, and adjusted the veil draped over Ava's hair. "Do not lower your chin when spoken to. It shortens the line." "I shall remember." "Also, your mother requests less colour in your lips. She says freshness can be mistaken for enthusiasm." Ava almost smiled at that. Not from amusement, from the clean absurdity of hearing desire managed like rouge. By the second week of September, Greycliff had become a theatre for arrangements. Florists measured archways in the chapel. Carpenters polished pew rails no one had touched in years. Guests arrived in hired coaches to inspect where they would sit, what they would wear, which alliances might be read from where one family stood in relation to another. The old bottling hall, with its stone floor and iron hooks in the beams, smelled of fermentation and ceremony in equal measure. Men in working clothes moved barrels, while ladies in satin crossed the same space and pretended not to notice labour except when it failed to vanish quickly enough. In that house, Ava moved as she had always moved, correctly, quietly, everywhere expected, and nowhere free. She poured tea for women who discussed her prospects as if she were in another room. She received cousins who kissed her cheek and whispered how fortunate she was not to face another season unengaged. She listened while her mother corrected the seating list, because old names must not be placed behind new money, as though rank could be protected by chair legs and distance from the aisle. She slept little and never overslept. If she pressed her fingertips into the inner seam of her skirt long enough, she could feel the shape of the tiny key she had stitched there that opened the side gate near the laundry court. That evening, after supper served in 3 courses she barely tasted, she carried a ledger to the study under instruction to leave it on Celia's desk. The corridor outside was dim, lit by sconces turned low. Voices came through the half-closed door, Celia's measured cadence and Julian's lower reply. "She need not be happy," Julian said. "She need only be manageable." Celia answered, "She is not dramatic. She has inherited my discipline where it matters." Ava stood very still, the ledger against her ribs, listening to her own breath enter and leave, as if it belonged to someone across the hall. Her fingers tightened on the leather edge until the corner bit into her palm. She could have stepped away. She did not. The conversation continued in the language of timetables, signatures, settlement dates, final notices to creditors. Her name appeared between numbers. She set the ledger down on the floor beside the door, straightened, and walked away before the boards could creak under indecision. At the turn of the corridor, she paused only long enough to smooth her sleeve. In the glass of a darkened window, she saw her face pale and composed, eyes too bright, not broken, braced. In her room, she lit one candle, then another, and opened the wardrobe drawer. The bag was still there, strap coiled like a waiting hand. She added one item, her father's watch, heavy and old, its chain worn thin at the clasp. She weighed it for a moment in her palm, then set it in the side pocket and closed the flap. A knock sounded again, 2 beats apart. Mrs. Hart's voice came through the panel. "Miss Thompson, Lady Celia requests your presence in the morning room at 9. Mr. Penrose has amended the transfer pages. She says there must be no further delay." Ava looked at the documents on her table, at her own signatures drying in dark loops that resembled obedience. "Tell my mother I shall attend," she said. When the maid's steps had faded, Ava drew the marriage settlement toward her, turned to clause 14, and began to read each line aloud under her breath, once, then again, until the candle burned low, and the house settled into the false peace of people, certain tomorrow would proceed exactly as arranged. The candle sank into its own wax, while Ava read clause 14 a 3rd time, tracing each comma with the edge of her nail until language ceased to resemble promise and became mechanism. Transfer upon notice, consolidation upon solemnization, authority vested in husband's office. The words were clean, and their cleanliness was the harm. Near midnight she blotted the page, folded it with care she did not feel, and placed it beneath her prayer book, as if scripture might dull the edge of legal prose. At dawn, Mrs. Hart woke her with hot water and a schedule recited from memory. Morning room at 9, music rehearsal at 10:30, a cold luncheon with Mrs. Pembroke and her daughters at Jeune, veil adjustment at 3, final review of transfer pages at 4, chapel walk-through at 6. Ava listened from the dressing stool while the maid buttoned her into pale blue day silk, each pearl button fastening like a tiny act of consent. In the morning room, Celia sat at the narrow escritoire by the east window where the light favoured signatures and discouraged hesitation. The household post lay in 3 neat stacks: invitations, invoices, and private correspondence. Ava noticed, as she always did, that her own letters were already opened, each fold pressed flat before being returned to envelope. "You have 1 reply from Kent," Celia said, sliding a sealed paper toward her daughter. "From your aunt. She regrets she cannot travel." Ava held out her hand. Celia did not release the letter at once. "She includes advice," Celia said. "I have removed the sentimental pages. You do not require them today." Celia let go. Ava said nothing. She tucked the letter into her reticule unopened, feeling the weight of missing pages more than the paper itself. Mr. Penrose arrived with amended documents and the same reverent cough. He spread sheets across the table, angled so Celia could monitor both text and daughter. Julian came 10 minutes later, gloves in hand, smelling faintly of bergamot and wet wool, his expression courteous in the way of a man viewing a negotiation already decided. "We have corrected the valuation language," Penrose said. "Miss Thompson's dowry shares shall transfer upon registration, not upon procession." "Registration occurs before vows," Ava said. Penrose gave a reluctant smile. "You read diligently, miss." "She reads defensively," Celia replied. "Proceed." The solicitor read, Julian nodded, and Celia occasionally lifted one finger to halt a sentence she considered redundant. Ava listened. She asked for page numbers. She asked for cross-references. She asked why quarterly allowance required husband approval if principal had already transferred. Each question slowed the room by a fraction. Each answer arrived in smooth legal diction designed to make dependency sound prudent. At last Julian said, "Miss Thompson, there is no advantage in treating marriage as litigation." Ava met his gaze. His eyes were grey-blue, handsome and untroubled, the eyes of a man for whom rooms rearrange themselves without friction. "There is no advantage in signing unread papers either, Mr. Mercer." Celia did not rebuke either of them. She closed the folder, decisive. "You will sign at 4. "As you direct," Ava said, and the sentence came out level. The day narrowed around her. At 10:30 she stood in the chapel loft while the organist rehearsed the processional at half volume, the notes thin in the empty nave. Dust moved in bars of light above polished pews. The florist tested garlands against stone and rejected 2 for being too green. In the front row, Mrs. Pembroke whispered to another guest, not quietly enough. "She is fortunate he is willing," Mrs. Pembroke said, given the rumours about her father's accounts. Ava adjusted her gloves and looked straight ahead. Not fortunate, useful. She descended from the loft with measured steps, pausing by the side aisle when one of the younger maids dropped a basket of folded hymn sheets. Ava knelt, gathered the papers, and returned them before the girl could stammer an apology large enough to satisfy class etiquette. By now, the routines had acquired the weight of custom, as if they had always existed and would continue long after she ceased to occupy them. Breakfast arrived at 8, whether she ate or not. Dressmakers entered without waiting for answer, because fittings could not drift. Men from the counting room delivered expense ledgers to Celia, and only summaries to Ava. Even her walks were shaped by decorum. One circuit from South Terrace to Lavender Court and back, never beyond the orchard gate unless accompanied. At luncheon, Mrs. Pembroke smiled over broth and said, "You must be excited to leave girlish uncertainty behind." Ava set down her spoon. "I have never been uncertain of my obligations." Mrs. Pembroke laughed as if she had heard wit, then turned to discuss lace tariffs. Across the table, Celia did not look up, but Ava felt the flicker of approval reserved for answers that revealed nothing. At 3, Madame Fournier fitted the veil and murmured practical cruelties with professional grace. "If you keep your shoulders this tense, the lace will pull. My shoulders are as you arranged them." "As your mother arranged them," Madame corrected softly, pinning a comb at Ava's nape. "Lift your chin. Yes, like that. Still." At 4, Ava returned to the morning room. Penrose placed the final transfer page in front of her, and Celia supplied the pen. Julian stood by the mantel, silent, watching the flame. Ava read every line aloud under her breath. She signed one page, then another, withholding the final signature where execution required a witness from Greycliff's ownership office. Penrose marked the blank with a slip of red ribbon. "We will obtain estate countersignature after tomorrow's rehearsal," he said. "A formality." Ava placed the pen down. "Formality often has teeth, Mr. Penrose." Julian's mouth moved as if he might answer, then stilled. Celia rose. "Enough. You are due in the courtyard." The rehearsal gathered beneath a sky turning brass with late light. Carriages lined the sweep before the old bottling hall, wheels bright with polish. Coachmen in dark livery holding reins with ceremonial stillness. Guests stepped around stacked crates as if labour were scenery set for their convenience. The stone underfoot held warmth from the day, and the smell of fermenting grapes lifted from the lower presses in a sweet, yeasted haze. Ava took her assigned place near the chapel steps while the vicar reviewed order of entry. Bridesmaids rustled. Cousins debated seating with tiny ferocity. Somewhere beyond the arch, casks thudded into wagons for morning dispatch. The two worlds of Greycliff, production and display, shared a courtyard and pretended not to touch. Then they did. An old harvest truck rattled through the east gate, mud-caked to its fenders and louder than any carriage present. Conversations snapped off in strips. Heads turned. The truck lurched once, corrected, and rolled to a stop near the bottling doors where only staff wagons were meant to stand. A man climbed down from the driver's side in work shirt and weathered coat, his sleeves rolled, his hands dark with road dust. He was not young and not old. Tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the quiet economy of someone accustomed to heavy things and to being ignored while he moved them. A shallow cut crossed the heel of his left hand where he had likely slipped a rope. He glanced once over the assembled guests, expression unreadable, then went to the rear gate of the truck and dropped it with a metallic crack. One of Julian's acquaintances laughed under his breath. "God preserve us. Has the harvest begun in the aisle?" Another guest said, "Who admitted him during rehearsal?" The steward hurried over, flustered. "Name?" The man answered without haste. "Ilias Reed, cask delivery from North Parcels. I was told unloading could not wait." "Not now," the steward hissed, glancing towards Celia. "Use the service yard." Elias nodded once as if correction were weather, and began hauling the first cask anyway, bracing it against his thigh before rolling it towards the bottling doors with practiced control. No complaint, no apology. Near the chapel steps, someone muttered, "These men appear from mud and expect courtesy." Ava heard Celia say, in the same tone she used for floral substitutions, "Remove him from view." No one moved quickly enough. The cask slipped at the threshold and struck stone. Elias caught it with both hands before it tipped, but the rough iron hoop scraped his palm deeper. He did not curse. He set the cask upright, breath steady, and reached for the next one. Ava looked at the line of guests, at gloves and pearls and careful indifference. She stepped down from the chapel stair, silk hem brushing grit, and crossed the courtyard before anyone called her name. At the side table where servants had set decanters for rehearsal guests, she took a glass of water and a folded linen napkin, then went to where Elias stood by the truck bed. He straightened when she approached, surprise contained but visible in the brief stillness of his shoulders. "You are bleeding," she said, formal and quiet. "Please rinse your hand." He looked at the water, then at her face, as if measuring whether this was performance. "Miss Thompson, this is not required." "Neither is discourtesy," she said, and held out the glass. For a second he did not take it. His eyes were dark hazel, edged with gold where light caught them, and there was nothing deferential in them now. Not insolence, assessment. Then he accepted the water, poured it over the cut, and pressed the linen to his palm. "Thank you," he said. Behind her she could feel the attention of the courtyard tighten into whisper. Celia's voice carried, cool and distinct. "Ava, return to your place." Ava did not turn immediately. She set the remaining corner of linen on a crate where he could reach it. "There is carbolic in the side pantry near the loading dock. Ask Mrs. Donnelly." Elias inclined his head. "I will remember." She walked back across the gravel in shoes made for carpets, each step deliberate, and resumed her place on the chapel stair as if she had fetched nothing more contentious than a prayer book. The vicar cleared his throat and restarted the rehearsal from the opening hymn. It ended at dusk. Guests dispersed toward dinner, carrying with them the pleasure of fresh material. Ava lingered in the corridor between chapel and bottling hall, where stone held the day's last heat and shadows lengthened along the wall of old ledgers. She was about to turn toward the main house when a voice came from the service passage to her left. "Miss Thompson." Elias stood half in shadow, coat off, hand newly bandaged with plain white strip. Up close he smelled of soap, crushed leaves, and engine oil. He kept a respectful distance. "You left your glove," he said, holding out kid leather the colour of cream. Ava took it. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." He gave one small nod, then said in the same measured tone he had used with the steward, "Do not sign anything you have not read twice, Miss Thompson." She stared at him, glove between her fingers. From the far end of the corridor came laughter from the dining room and the distant clink of glass. "I beg your pardon?" she asked. He had already stepped back toward the service stair. "Good evening," he said, and disappeared down into the dark toward the loading dock, leaving her with a single glove, a line of warning, and the first fracture in the certainty that tomorrow would proceed as arranged. Ava stood in the corridor until the chill from the stone climbed through the soles of her shoes and into her calves, the cream glove resting against her palm like a small, unnecessary mercy. Laughter spilled again from the dining room, silver striking porcelain, and the ordinary sounds of celebration resumed with the confidence of people who believed interruptions could be folded away and forgotten. She drew one breath, then another, and turned toward the side stair that led past the chapel entrance and out to the courtyard. At the top step, the evening light had thinned to amber. Workers were clearing flower crates from the aisle and the last of the musicians had gone. Ava reached for her reticule to tuck the glove inside, fumbled against the clasp, and watched the second glove slip free and fall to the chapel stones below. It landed near the hem of a dark coat before she could descend. Elias bent, lifted it, and came up without haste. The bandage on his left hand was already marked at the edge where labour had reopened the day's wound. He looked at the glove, then at her, and mounted 2 steps, stopping with proper distance between them. "Yours, Miss Thompson," he said. "Yes. Thank you." She took it. Their fingers did not touch. She should have moved away at once, but she heard herself say, very low, "Your warning in the corridor was unusual." "It was. You do not know me." "No," he said. "I know paper." The answer might have sounded insolent from another man. From him, it sounded like a fact set on a table. Below them, the courtyard emptied in strips of shadow. A servant crossed with lanterns and did not glance up. Ava folded both gloves together, buying 1 second more. Most men in this house prefer not to notice what is written. Most men in this house do not sign what is written. The corner of her mouth moved before she could stop it. That is a luxury. His eyes held hers for a beat, dark hazel, steady, then shifted to the chapel door where fresh garlands hung too carefully from polished brass. So I gathered. He began to incline his head in dismissal, then paused as if deciding whether to speak again. If you must sign, mark the witness line yourself before they hand you the pen. Ink cannot be moved once laid. She stared at him. You speak as if you have watched this done before. I have watched many things done before. The sentence might have ended there, but a strange softness altered his face. He smiled once, briefly, and the change was startling. The hard plains of fatigue and weather gave way to something unexpectedly young, almost unguarded, before composure settled over him again. Good evening, Miss Thompson. He stepped down, turned toward the loading yard, and was gone into the gathering dark. Ava remained on the chapel step until the bells in the west tower marked the quarter hour. Not flirtation, not rescue. Recognition, no larger than a match flame and no less dangerous for being small. She tucked the gloves away, lifted her chin, and crossed back into the house where dinner waited, and conversation resumed around her as if she had merely gone to fetch air. By first light the next morning, Greycliff's loading dock was awake with iron noise and damp breath from the presses. Ava had been sent to the chapel with revised seating cards and told to return by the service path so she might not be delayed by arriving guests. The shortcut took her above the dock, where carts lined the cobbles and men in work shirts shifted casks from truck bed to hoist. Elias stood below with a slate tucked under one arm, speaking in short instructions that carried over the racket without effort. Not that row. The oak from North Parcels goes inside first. The bung is loose. Turn it and check again. Tell Donnelly those 3 are for reserve, not table. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The foreman, Mr. Pike, who ignored nearly everyone short of Celia, obeyed him at once, repeating orders down the line as if they had come from the estate office itself. Ava slowed on the path, cards pressed to her ribs, and watched Elias mark symbols on the slate in a hand, too controlled for a drifter's work. He looked up only once, catching sight of her silhouette above the rail, and gave the slightest nod before returning to the casks. A driver did not command like that. A hired hand did not direct reserve stock by parcel name. She went on to the chapel without letting her pace change. Survival at Greycliff had always depended on noticing everything and declaring nothing. That evening, the rehearsal dinner filled the long gallery with polished silver, beeswax candles, and the layered scent of roasted pheasant and late roses beginning to turn at the edges. Ava sat between Mrs. Pembroke and a cousin from Bath, and answered each question in measured phrases while Julian entertained the tablehead, with stories of London financing no one understood but everyone praised. Celia, in garnet silk, presided with the cool concentration of a banker balancing risk. When the second course ended, Ava stepped into the corridor to escape the heat and to fetch a handkerchief from the cloakroom. 2 young men she recognized from Julian's circle stood near the window alcove with brandy glasses, speaking in that careless tone men used when they assumed walls were loyal. Mercer did well, one said. Debt-ridden name, decent face, obedient temperament. The mother negotiated neatly, the other replied. The daughter is part of the package. Ava kept walking, shoulders level, gaze forward. At the far end of the corridor, Elias emerged from the service door carrying a crate of empty decanters. He took in the men, then her, then the narrowing space between. Without acknowledging either speaker, he shifted the crate to his bandaged hand, opened the cloakroom door with his shoulder, and stood aside so Ava could pass first, as if it had always been his task to clear her path. The two men had to move to let her through. They did, muttering nothing this time. Inside the cloakroom, she found her handkerchief and turned. Elias had not followed. He waited in the corridor with the crate balanced against his hip, eyes fixed on a cracked floor tile as though inventorying stone. "Thank you," she said from the threshold. He answered without looking up. "No thanks required." It is when courtesy is rare. Now he glanced at her, expression unreadable. "Then spend it carefully, Miss Thompson." She almost asked him who had taught him to make rank sound trivial without breaking a rule. Instead, she gave a single incline of her head and returned to dinner before her absence could be noted by anyone who mattered. 3 days passed before the first autumn storm swept across the ridge and turned the lower Vineyard road into rutted clay. Celia insisted on visiting the far storage sheds despite warnings from staff, and Ava rode opposite her in the small carriage, skirts gathered clear of damp straw, while the driver urged the pair of bays down the slope. Halfway through the western rows, the left wheel struck a hidden stone. Wood cracked. The carriage lurched and listed hard to one side, throwing Ava's shoulder against the panel. The driver swore softly, climbed down and stared at the split axle with visible dread. Celia's mouth thinned. "We cannot sit here. Fetch men." Before the driver moved, an engine sounded through rain-thick air. The borrowed harvest truck appeared between vine lines, tires slipping once before finding grip. Elias stopped beside them, cut the engine, and came around to inspect the damage. "Axle pin sheared," he said after one look. Celia drew herself up behind the carriage door. "Then replace it, immediately." Elias did not react to her tone. He crouched, tested the wheel, and addressed the driver. "Lift the rear brace, not there. Under the housing. Good." Then to Ava with formal calm. "Miss Thompson, step down on this side. The mud is firmer." He offered no hand. He simply positioned himself between her and the sucking rut, creating a stable line from carriage step to dry ground. Ava descended, skirt held clear, boots sinking only slightly. Rain dotted her sleeves and cooled her face. Celia remained seated, clearly expecting assistance. Elias turned to the driver again. "Your lady can transfer to the truck once we secure the wheel. It will hold for the climb if we keep weight forward." "You will not drive me in that vehicle," Celia said. His reply was flat. "Then you may wait for a second carriage, Mrs. Thompson. It will be an hour in this weather." Celia stared at him, astonished that refusal could be delivered without insolence, and still stand. She chose silence, which was not consent, but proximity to it. Within minutes, the axle was braced with chain and timber from the truck bed. Elias checked the knots himself, then stepped back. "Slow pace only. No sharp turns," he told the driver. "Use the upper path." The driver nodded like a schoolboy receiving correction. Ava saw it then as clearly as she saw rain threading from Elias's hair to the collar of his shirt. Men accustomed to command recognized it in him and answered. On the return climb, Celia spoke once, eyes fixed on the wet glass. "These labourers are growing presumptuous." Ava looked out at rows of vines dark with rain. He prevented a worse delay. Celia's voice cooled further. "Do not mistake efficiency for importance." Ava did not answer. Her shoulder ached where it had struck the panel. She pressed gloved fingers to the bruise and held still until they reached the house. By the second week of October, the wedding notices had been drafted, and the estate accounts had begun to tighten under harvest pressure. Ava was sent to the counting room with a sealed note for Mr. Wren regarding supplier invoices. She expected ledgers, ink dust, and clerks. She did not expect Elias. He stood at the end of the long table with his coat off, sleeves rolled, reading a page from the vintage register while Mr. Wren, who treated visiting shareholders with exhausting deference, waited for him to finish. Two clerks hovered beside stacked payroll books. Elias tapped one column with the blunt end of a pencil. "Why is row 12 listed twice under cooperage?" Wren swallowed. "A copying oversight, Mr. Reed. It appears in wages as well. Correct it before release." "Yes, of course." Ava paused at the threshold. Wren saw her and hastened forward. "Miss Thompson, your note." She handed it over, but her gaze remained on Elias. He had turned the register page and was scanning harvest dates with swift, practiced attention. "A driver audits payroll now?" she asked before caution could intervene. Mr. Wren's face flickered. "Mr. Reed has been assisting with delivery discrepancies." "Among other discrepancies," Elias said. He set the pencil down, looked at Ava directly, and added with impeccable neutrality, "Good afternoon, Miss Thompson." She returned his gaze, pulse steady but sharpened. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reed." No one else in the room seemed to find the exchange unusual. That was the most unusual part of all. Wren broke the silence by clearing his throat and shuffling her note into a folder marked "Urgent." Ava inclined her head and withdrew. In the corridor she slowed only once, near the window overlooking the East Court, and allowed herself one private thought before locking it away again. He was either a man pretending to be lesser, or a man everyone had agreed to pretend with. Neither possibility was safe. At Vespers the following Sunday, banns were posted in the church vestibule under glass, names written in formal hand for any parish eye to read. Ava stood with her prayer book closed against her chest, while guests inspected the notice with practiced solemnity. Thompson and Mercer. Date and witness lines. The future presented as ink. As she turned to leave, she saw Elias near the rear pillar speaking quietly with the sexton. The older man handed him a small packet of sealing wafers and bowed with unmistakable respect. Not courtesy to a worker, deference to authority. Elias noticed Ava watching. He crossed the vestibule and stopped at an appropriate distance, hat in hand. "Miss Thompson," he said, "the band's clerk misspelled your middle name. It has been corrected." She had not told anyone to check that. "You read them closely." "I read documents closely." A faint, almost dry note entered her voice. "So you have advised." His gaze held hers for one beat longer than protocol required. "Advice is only useful when timed." The chapel door opened behind her. Julian's voice floated in from the nave, calling her name with public warmth and private ownership. Ava did not turn at once. "Mr. Reed," she said, each syllable precise. "You appear wherever paper decides my life." He answered in the same measured register. Then perhaps paper is not the only thing being watched. She understood the warning and refused the comfort of it in equal measure. "Good evening." "Good evening, Miss Thompson." She stepped back into the nave, where candles burned steadily and guests made room for her passage with approving smiles. Behind her, the vestibule door closed softly, and the latch settled into place with the quiet finality of a line drawn, but not yet crossed. The latch settled behind her, and the sound seemed to travel through the chapel stone into her spine. Ava crossed the nave toward Julian, who waited near the front pew with his hand already extended, as if she had merely paused to admire candles, and not to exchange warnings with a man in a weathered coat. "You were missed," Julian said, low enough to sound intimate to anyone watching. "I was delayed in the vestibule," she answered. He offered his arm. She placed her fingertips lightly at his sleeve, the gesture exact. Around them, parish wives lowered their voices and turned pages they had not been reading. At the rear, Celia spoke to the vicar about floral delivery windows, discussing white roses as though the timing of petals held more urgency than names under glass. By the time they returned to Greycliff, evening had tightened over the vines, and the household moved in lamplit channels. Supper was served late because 2 carriages had sunk at the lower turn, and guests required dry cloaks. In the confusion, staff crossed the passages in hurried pairs, trays shaking slightly in their hands. Ava was sent to the small breakfast room to take tea with Celia and Mrs. Pembroke, while Julian met a broker in the library. Halfway through the second pot, Mrs. Donnelly, the housekeeper, appeared at the door with a folded paper, and the expression she reserved for practical emergencies. "Pardon, Lady Celia, there is a request from the South Cottages." Celia did not look up from the guest list she was revising. "Read it." "Thomas Hale's youngest girl has taken a lung fever. The surgeon prescribed tincture and mustard poultice. Mrs. Hale asks whether wages due on Thursday might be advanced by 2 days. Mrs. Pembroke clicked her tongue with polite sympathy. "How unfortunate." Celia set down her pen and held out her hand for the paper. She scanned it once, then placed it on the tray beside the untouched lemon slices. "No advances before disbursement," she said. "If one family receives exception, all will petition. We are not a charity bureau." "Lady Celia, the child is 8, Mrs. Donnelly said carefully. "Then her parents may borrow against their own effects. Tell Mr. Wren to hold the payroll schedule. Transfer reviews first." Mrs. Donnelly's jaw tightened by a fraction. "As you direct." When she withdrew, the room resumed its silver and porcelain quiet. Celia lifted her cup. "Where were we? Ah yes, the Ashburys must not be seated near the Harlands." Ava kept her gaze on the tea surface, where lamplight trembled in a thin oval. Not shock, familiarity. The same cold arithmetic applied to everyone below the dining floor. At her left wrist, pulse tapped against bone in hard, even beats. After tea, Celia instructed her to deliver amended guest cards to the morning room and retire early for tomorrow's legal review. Ava obeyed in sequence, card by card, corridor by corridor. In her chamber, she dismissed Mrs. Hart, waited until the maid's steps had faded, then opened the wardrobe drawer and unfastened the travel bag she had packed weeks before. The old watch lay in its side pocket wrapped in a handkerchief, heavy as a held breath. Her father had wound it every Sunday at dusk. He had called it stubborn because it ran 2 minutes slow unless coaxed. She sat on the bed edge with the watch in her palm until the metal warmed to her skin. Then she wrapped it again and slid it into her reticule. By Tuesday morning, the sky hung low over the ridge, and harvest carts left dark tracks across the east yard. Ava asked permission to visit the chapel to review hymn cards before noon. Celia agreed at once, pleased by obedience that looked devotional. Instead of turning right at the transept passage, Ava took the laundry stair, crossed the service court, and used the small gate key stitched into her skirt seam. The gate opened with one dry scrape. The village lane smelled of wet straw and coal smoke. She pulled her hood forward and walked past the post office to Mr. Kettering's shop, where watches were repaired in front and bought in back with less ceremony than truth. A brass bell announced her. Mr. Kettering emerged from behind a curtain, spectacles low on his nose, eyes quick. "Miss Thompson," he said, then corrected himself at once when he saw her plain cloak and lowered head. "Madam, how may I assist you?" She placed the wrapped watch on the counter. "I require immediate sale, no notice sent." He opened the cloth and exhaled softly at the engraving inside the case. "This is fine London work, family piece." "I am aware." He named a figure meant for desperation. She met his gaze and said, "You can do better than insulting me in your own shop." His brows lifted. He named a second figure, still lean. Ava held out her hand for the watch. He hesitated, then gave a third. It remained below value and above cruelty. "Done," she said. He counted notes and coins into an envelope, eyes darting once to the lane as if wealth might be seen passing through plain paper. Ava tucked the envelope away and crossed directly to the apothecary. The apothecary smelled of camphor, vinegar, and dried lavender hanging from beams. Shelves rose behind the counter in disciplined rows of labelled glass. Mr. Ellis, who had treated half the Vineyard staff through winters of cough and summers of fever, looked up from his ledger. "Miss Thompson?" "I am here for the Hale prescription," she said quietly, "and for a home visit if the surgeon has not gone yet." He blinked, then reached for the folded order clipped beneath an inkwell. "Lady Celia has not authorized charge. Do not charge Greycliff." She set the envelope on the counter and pushed it toward him. "Prepare what is needed for 3 days. If there is remainder, place it against their account. Mr. Ellis opened the envelope, saw the amount, and looked back at her with new care. "This exceeds tincture and poultice. Then include broth powder and cold credit. No family recovers in cold rooms." He nodded once. "Very good." While he measured drops into brown glass and wrapped powders in folded paper, Ava stood with her gloves clasped, listening to rain begin at the window. The bell rang behind her. 2 field hands entered, caps in hand, then stopped when they recognized her profile. She did not turn. Mr. Ellis sealed the parcel with twine and wrote H on the top corner. "Shall I send it up with my boy?" "I will take it to Mrs. Donnelly for delivery." At the ledger he dipped his pen. "How shall I record payment?" Ava paused. Names were currency in both directions. "Record private settlement, no initials." "As you wish." She took the parcel, thanked him, and stepped back into rain that had settled into steady lines. At the lane corner, a truck idled near the cooper's shed, mud on its wheel arches, driver's door open. She saw only the truck, not the man standing inside the apothecary's side room signing for axle grease, where the ledger lay open 2 pages back with the fresh line. Private settlement, Hale prescription, paid in full. By late afternoon she had crossed back through the side gate, changed to dry cuffs, and carried the parcel to Mrs. Donnelly in the still room under the pretense of reviewing pantry lists. "For the South Cottages," Ava said, setting the wrapped bundle beside jars of quince preserve. "Tell Mrs. Hale it came through parish relief." Mrs. Donnelly looked from the parcel to Ava's face and understood more than she asked. "Parish relief does not tie knots like this." "Then untie it before you deliver." The older woman's eyes softened, then hardened again against gratitude that could be dangerous. "It will be done." Ava turned to go. "Miss Thompson," Mrs. Donnelly called softly. Ava stopped. "The girl's name is Lucy." Ava inclined her head and left, before kindness could become conversation. Evening brought another legal conference, this one in Celia's study with account books spread open like judgment. Mr. Wren reported delayed Cooper payments, rain losses in the lower rows, and a shortfall if dowry shares were not transferred before month's end. Celia listened with fingers steepled. "Move the signing to Friday," she said. "No further ceremonial delays." Mr. Penrose, summoned at once, adjusted his notes. "The chapel ceremony remains Saturday." "Then registration and transfer Friday at noon," Celia said. "Mr. Mercer will attend. Miss Thompson will attend." Ava sat in the straight-backed chair by the fire and felt heat gather at her knees, while her hands stayed cold. "Friday is earlier than agreed." Celia turned her pale gaze on her daughter. Agreement implies parity. This is necessity. Julian, leaning by the mantel, spoke without looking at Ava. The adjustment is sensible. Ava held his profile for a moment, then answered, I will review the pages again tonight. Celia's mouth moved in something close to impatience. Review what you please. You will sign. As you wish. The words landed softly and did not yield. 3 days before the wedding, Greycliff's chapel was closed for final floral work, so vestry documents were stored in the side sacristy where old cassocks hung behind a cedar screen. After supper, Mrs. Hart sent Ava to fetch the revised witness cards and return them to Celia's desk. The corridors near the chapel were dim, lamps turned low to preserve wax for the ceremony. Ava carried a single taper and moved through the side door to the vestry passage, where stone held a cool, damp scent and the faint sweetness of cut roses waiting in buckets. The sacristy door stood nearly closed. Voices came through the gap. She recognized Julian first, precise and unhurried. She is convenient, not beloved. Silence followed, then Celia's tone flat as ledger paper. Beloved women are expensive. Julian gave a short breath that might have been amusement. Once she signs, she will reside where she is placed. She prefers quiet. That will simplify matters. Ava did not move. The taper flame bent and recovered in her hand. Somewhere in the chapel proper, a ladder scraped stone as a florist shifted position. Celia said, Keep appearances intact for 6 months. After that, arrangement is your affair. Of course. Paper rustled. A chair leg touched floor. Ava stepped back into the shadow beside the doorframe before either could emerge, pressing her free hand to the wall until lime grit marked her glove. Her left hand had begun to tremble, not violently, just enough for the taper wax to stripe her knuckles. She set the candle on the sill, closed her fingers into a fist until the shaking eased, and swallowed against a sudden sharp rise of nausea. Insurance, placement, simplify matters. The language was clean, and it cut cleanly. Footsteps approached from the chapel end of the corridor. Mrs. Hart appeared with a basket of ribbon cards and stopped when she saw Ava in the half-dark. Miss Thompson, Lady Celia asks whether you have the witness list. Ava picked up the taper, reached for the stack of cards on the table just inside the door, and turned with her shoulders level. I have it, she said. Her voice did not waver. Mrs. Hart nodded, relieved by normal tone, and stepped aside to let her pass. Ava walked the length of the corridor with measured pace, witness cards steady in one hand, taper in the other, while behind the sacristy door conversation resumed in low legal murmurs about signatures and noon appointments. Ava walked the corridor with the witness cards balanced against her palm, and the taper held steady, each step measured to the same pace she had practiced since girlhood. At the turn near the morning room, she paused only long enough to press her thumb into the edge of the top card until the paper bent, then straightened it again and continued. The house smelled of candle smoke and damp wool from guests' cloaks drying near kitchen fires. Voices rose from the main stair in tidy currents. Nothing in Greycliff had shifted except her. Celia was waiting in the study with Julian and Mr. Penrose, all three standing around the escritoire, where the transfer pages lay stacked and ribboned. The fire had burned low, leaving the room bright only at the desk, and dim along the walls where family portraits watched in varnished silence. You were delayed, Celia said. The florist blocked the sacristy passage, Ava answered, and set the witness cards beside the inkstand. Penrose reached for them at once. Excellent. We shall have these copied by midnight and signed tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow at noon, Julian repeated, as if confirming a train departure. Ava looked at the documents, then at the red ribbon marking the execution line. And if one witness is unavailable? Penrose gave a brief, patronizing smile. At Greycliff, miss, one does not misplace witnesses. Celia closed the folder. You are fatigued. Go upstairs. Ava inclined her head. As you direct. She left before they could hear the tremor in the hand that carried the taper. In her chamber, she set the candle down, crossed to the wardrobe, and pulled the travel bag into the center of the room. She did not sit. She folded one dark day dress over the existing layers, added stockings, wrapped a plain shawl around her prayer book, and tied the straps tight enough to bite her fingers. The side pocket where her father's watch had rested lay flat. Empty. She pressed her palm there for one breath, then moved to the dressing table and removed the pearl combs one by one until her hair fell loose over her shoulders. At the door, she stopped, turned back and looked at the wedding gown hanging from the walnut screen, ivory silk catching candlelight like quiet water. Celia had chosen every seam. Madame Fournier had corrected every line of posture to match it. Julian had approved the lace without once asking what Ava preferred. She crossed to it, touched the sleeve with 2 fingers, then lifted the gown from its peg and laid it carefully over the chair. Not torn, not ruined, simply set aside. Control, not spectacle. A soft knock sounded. 2 beats. Mrs. Hart entered with a folded veil over her arm and paused when she saw the open bag. Miss Thompson? Ava turned, her face composed. Please leave the veil there. Mrs. Hart set it on the bed. Her eyes moved from the bag to Ava's loosened hair, then back again. Lady Celia requests you be dressed by 8 tomorrow. Guests will gather in the upper hall first. I understand. The maid hesitated. Shall I send warm milk? No, thank you. Mrs. Hart gave a small nod and withdrew, closing the door with unusual care. Ava waited until the latch settled, then drew the bolt across for the first time in her life at Greycliff. She changed into a plain walking dress and sat at the writing table long enough to draft one sentence on a blank card in a hand that did not betray haste. I decline to sign. She placed the card on top of the transfer copy she had taken from the study side stack, while Penrose examined witness names, then extinguished every candle except one, and lay down fully clothed on top of the coverlet with the bag at her side. By dawn, the chapel bells had begun their interval chime, and the house woke in layers, kitchen doors, stair runners, trunks shifting, laughter from cousins who slept well in borrowed rooms. Ava rose before anyone knocked, braided her hair, and pinned it under a plain cap. She did not ring for Mrs. Hart. She lifted the bag, unlocked the door, and stepped into the corridor while the upper floor was still empty. At the main landing, she heard Celia's voice below, directing flower placement in brisk, exact phrases. The scent of white roses climbed the stairwell, heavy and sweet. Ava descended halfway, then turned into the side passage and crossed to the library, where Julian stood at the window in morning coat, reading the financial circular as if weddings were administrative interruptions. He looked up. Miss Thompson, you are not prepared. Ava set the bag down beside the nearest chair. No. His gaze dropped to the bag and hardened. What is this? The only luggage I require. Julian folded the circular. You're overwrought. Return to your room. Ava met his eyes and kept her voice level. I heard you in the sacristy. Silence held between them. He did not ask what she had heard. At last he said, You were not meant to. No, she answered. I was meant to sign. He took one step toward her, tone still polite, and now edged with impatience. Do not convert private candor into public foolishness. The arrangements stand. Ava lifted the bag again. Not with me. He reached for the bell pull beside the mantel. She spoke before he touched it. Call whom you like. The words stopped him for a beat, Then he lowered his hand and said, with controlled contempt, "You do not have the means to leave this house alone." From the corridor, Celia answered for him before Ava could speak. "She does, if someone has encouraged disobedience." Celia entered, already dressed for ceremony in steel blue silk. Her gaze went first to Ava's cap and plain dress, then to the bag, and finally to Ava's face. No surprise. Calculation. "You will change at once," Celia said. Ava did not move. Celia stepped closer, voice quiet enough that servants passing the far hall would hear nothing. "There are creditors tied to this signature. There is family name attached to this aisle. There is no path for you beyond this house that does not end in humiliation." Ava held her mother's eyes. "Then I shall be humiliated." Julian gave a short, disbelieving breath. "For what? Principle?" "For dignity." Celia's expression did not alter. "You are dramatizing logistics." Ava lifted the bag strap higher on her shoulder. "No, I am refusing placement." For the first time, a flicker crossed Celia's features. Not grief, not anger, but affront at language taken from her own system, and turned back. She reached out and caught Ava's wrist. Her grip was not violent. It was iron. "You will go upstairs." Ava looked at her mother's hand, then back at her face. "Release me." Celia held one heartbeat longer, then let go. "If you leave this room dressed like that, you leave without name, money, or shelter." Ava bent, picked up the bag she had set down again, and answered in 4 words. "Then I leave now." She walked past them into the corridor where 2 footmen froze with a flower stand between them. One stepped aside at once, the other followed. She crossed the upper hall as guests began to gather below, murmurs rising when they saw her plain dress and travel bag. No one addressed her directly. Society preferred observation to intervention. At the chapel antechamber, bridesmaids in pale satin parted as she approached. One cousin whispered, "Ava," as if testing whether she had become someone else overnight. Ava kept walking, removed the veil that had been draped over a stand for her entrance, folded it once, and set it on the nearest pew end. She did not run. She did not look back. In the courtyard, wilted rehearsal roses still clung to arch frames, their edges browned by the previous day's damp. The borrowed harvest truck stood near the loading doors, engine idling low, mud dried in thin fans along the wheel wells. Elias was at the driver's side checking a ledger sheet clipped to a board. He looked up when she reached him. His eyes moved over the bag, the plain dress, the bare head, and settled on her face. "Miss Thompson," he said. Ava stopped close enough to be heard over the engine and the chapel bell beginning the first call. Her throat tightened once, then cleared. "Drive me from here." He held her gaze for one measured breath, then opened the passenger door. "Get in." She climbed into the truck without assistance, set the bag at her feet, and gripped the edge of the seat as he rounded the hood. Voices broke across the courtyard behind them. Her name, Celia's sharper command, Julian's clipped demand for someone to stop the vehicle. Elias started the truck, shifted gear, and rolled forward at a controlled pace that offered no spectacle to grab, no reckless movement to justify pursuit. As they passed the gatehouse, Ava looked back once. Celia stood at the chapel steps, still as carved stone, one gloved hand at her side. Julian was already striding toward the stable yard, looking for a faster carriage. Elias did not increase speed until the truck cleared the estate boundary and the road dropped between hedges thick with late bramble. 3 miles on, he turned onto the old service lane that ran behind the lower press barns and climbed toward the estate office built into the rise above the bottling hall. It was a practical building of stone and slate, where wages, contracts, and harvest forecasts were kept away from dining room conversation. 2 clerks stood on the steps with Mr. Wren, all three looking as if they had been summoned in haste. Mr. Penrose was there as well, hat in hand, breath short, and beside him Mrs. Donnelly with her keys at her belt and an expression that gave nothing away. Elias cut the engine. "Bring your bag," he said quietly. Ava followed him inside to the long table where transfer ledgers lay open. Penrose recovered first. "Mr. Reed, this is highly irregular. Miss Thompson must return to the chapel immediately. We are minutes from ceremony." Elias removed his driving gloves and set them on the table with deliberate care. When he spoke, his voice carried the same measured tone Ava had heard at the dock, in the corridor, by the broken axle. Command without strain. "My name is Elias Vale. I own Greycliff Vineyard, the debt Mrs. Thompson pledged, and the contract she cannot execute without my signature." The room went still. Penrose blinked twice as if recalculating a sum gone wrong. Mr. Wren lowered his head at once, not in surprise but in acknowledgement, long practiced. Mrs. Donnelly did not move. Ava felt the words land in her body before she could order them in thought. Vale, owner, contract. Every inconsistency aligning at once. The payroll corrections, the reserve casks, the sexton's deference, the warning about witness lines. The authority men obeyed before they knew they were obeying. Penrose found his voice. "Sir, if this is some jest—" "It is recorded at County Registry under Vale Agricultural Holdings," Elias said. "You may send for the clerk if you require public confirmation." Julian entered then, coat unbuttoned, anger sharpened to civility by the presence of witnesses. Celia followed one step behind, face pale and exact. "Mr. Reed," Julian said, making the name a challenge, "you are obstructing a lawful marriage." Elias turned slightly, not enough to grant him centre. "No, I am declining an unlawful transfer." He drew the ribboned document toward him, flipped to the execution page, and placed his hand flat over the blank owner's line. "This transfer is refused." Celia spoke at last, each word cut clean. "On what ground?" "On mine," he said. Then he looked at Ava, and only Ava, before continuing in the same calm register. "Effective immediately. Miss Thompson's dowry shares remain in her name. Greycliff Management's salary and signing authority will be vested to her under protected trust, filed today with Mr. Wren and county seal." Julian took a step forward. "You cannot simply rewrite." Elias did not raise his voice. "I can, because you never had title. You had expectation." Mr. Wren slid a prepared folio across to Ava with shaking hands. On top lay a single page already drafted, her full name written correctly, each clause clear and narrow. Salary, authority, independent disbursement, no marital annexation without written consent. At the bottom waited only her signature. Ava looked at the page, then at Elias. "When was this prepared?" "After the banns were posted," he said, "before they moved your noon signing." Celia's gaze cut to him. "You have been spying in my house." He answered without looking at her. "I have been auditing mine." For the first time that morning, Ava felt her breath settle all the way to the base of her lungs. Not safety yet. Structure. Room to stand. She picked up the pen. Her hand was steady as she signed. Ink dried in a dark line beneath her name, and the silence in the estate office altered from shock to calculation. Ava set the pen down exactly where she had found it. Across the table, Celia's gaze moved to the signed trust page, then to Mr. Wren, as if discipline alone might force the paper back into obedience. "Strike it," Celia said. Mr. Wren did not touch the ledger. "I cannot, Lady Celia. It is entered." Julian reached for the folio, but Elias placed 2 fingers over the corner before he could lift it. The motion was almost gentle. "Do not," Elias said. Julian's jaw tightened. You concealed identity to interfere with contract. I concealed identity to audit conduct, Elias replied. Interference began when you drafted transfer without title. Mr. Penrose found enough breath to speak. This can be contested. It can be reviewed, Elias said. Contest requires a lawful basis. You may begin with County Registry, Volume 16, page 211. He turned to Mr. Wren. Send for Clerk Hadley, now. Bring the sealed title abstract. Wren bowed once and moved at speed, relief and fear warring across his face. The two clerks followed. Mrs. Donnelly remained by the door, keys quiet at her belt, watching Ava with an expression that held no pity and a great deal of respect. Celia shifted her attention to her daughter. If you continue this spectacle, you will have no place in this county. Ava met her mother's pale eyes and felt, for the first time, no need to win them. Then I will make one. Julian gave a short laugh with no humour in it. On a salary? On earned authority, Ava said. He said her name as if it had become distasteful. Do not mistake one man's intervention for freedom. Ava answered before Elias could. I do not mistake anything today. The chapel bells sounded again, distant through the stone walls, calling guests to a wedding that no longer existed. Celia turned toward the door. This discussion will continue in private, she said. Elias's voice stopped her before she reached the threshold. No, it will continue on record. He opened a second folder and withdrew a single-page notice, already signed. Mrs. Thompson, your note against Greycliff debt was contingent on maintaining estate value and lawful administration. Attempted transfer of encumbered shares without owner consent constitutes breach. I am calling the note effective today. For the first time, Celia's composure fractured. Not by much, a slight stillness in her shoulders, a pause before breath. You would dispossess us on a technicality. I would enforce terms you expected others to obey. A knock struck the outer door, then opened to admit Clerk Hadley in travel coat with registry satchel under his arm, rain beading on the leather. He saw the room, the faces, and immediately understood the stakes. Mr. Vale, he said with a bow, you requested certified abstract. Read the ownership line, Elias said. Hadley opened the satchel, broke red wax, and read in clear clerk's cadence. Greycliff Vineyard and associated production lands held by Elias Nathaniel Vale, sole title, through Vale Agricultural Holdings, recorded and current. No one spoke. Hadley looked to Penrose with professional courtesy. You may inspect seal and signature, sir. Penrose took the page, scanned, and went visibly grey. It is valid. Julian stepped back from the table. The fury in him had nowhere clean to go. This arrangement is concluded, he said to Celia, not to Ava. I withdraw all intent. He did not wait for permission. He took his gloves from the mantel and left through the side door, boots sharp on the corridor stone, already a man revising his future in real time. Celia watched him go, then looked once at Ava, once at Elias, and gave the smallest incline of her head, as if ending a call she had not enjoyed. You have chosen your circumstances. Ava held the travel bag strap against her shoulder. I have chosen myself. Celia left without another word. The room seemed larger after she was gone. Mrs. Donnelly moved first. She came to the table, placed the household keyring beside Ava's new ledger, and said, The wage books are due at 4. Pickers are waiting in the lower hall. Ava blinked. Today? Today, Donnelly said. Harvest does not pause for society. A dry note entered Elias's voice. Nor for cancelled weddings. It startled a breath of laughter out of Ava before she could prevent it. The sound steadied her more. than tears would have. In the chapel antechamber, the folded veil still lay where she had left it. Guests were dispersing in clusters of offended silk, their whispers already hardening into narrative. A society matron stood near the font, fan closed like a weapon. "Miss Thompson," she said, tone sharpened by public disappointment, "this morning has been extraordinary." Ava took up the veil and folded it once more. "So it has." The matron hesitated, perhaps expecting apology, perhaps instruction. Ava offered neither. She turned and crossed the nave, past pews where her name had been measured and priced, and exited into the courtyard where the borrowed truck waited in clear daylight, ordinary and indispensable. At the truck, Mrs. Hart appeared from the side passage carrying Ava's reticule and the blank card Ava had left on the transfer copy. The maid's face was pale but composed. "You forgot these," Mrs. Hart said. Ava accepted them. On the card, her own line remained stark and simple. "I decline to sign." Mrs. Hart lowered her voice. "Your aunt's letter. The missing pages were kept in Lady Celia's desk. I placed them in your bag." Ava searched her expression. "Why?" Mrs. Hart swallowed. "Because you were meant to receive your own words." She glanced toward the house where Celia's carriage was being loaded with abrupt efficiency. "I should have done it sooner." Ava touched the maid's wrist once, brief and firm. "You did it now." By the last Thursday of October, rain had given way to clear cold, and the harvest table was set in the old bottling hall, where wedding guests had once stepped around labour, as if it were inconvenient scenery. Now the long plank table held wage ledgers, ink, and stacks of envelopes tied by row number. Ava sat at the head in a dark wool dress, sleeves rolled above her wrists, signing release sheets while workers queued with caps in hand and boots damp from field frost. Mr. Wren read names. Ava checked entries herself, including the cooperage duplication Elias had flagged weeks earlier. When she found the corrected column, she placed a neat initial in the margin. "Thomas Hale," Wren called. Thomas came forward, shoulders bowed from work, and accepted his envelope with both hands. "Miss Thompson, Director Thompson, my Lucy is up and running again. Fever broke 2 nights after the medicine." Ava felt the empty side pocket in memory, the weight of the watch gone. "I am glad." Mrs. Hale stepped from the line behind him with a wrapped parcel. "From Lucy," she insisted. Inside was a child's drawing on rough paper, rows of vines, a square chapel, and a woman in a dark dress standing at a table with a pen. Ava placed the drawing beside the ledger blotter and continued signing. Near midday, a society matron entered with 2 ladies in polished boots, clearly intending a social call that would establish terms of gossip. They stopped when they saw Ava at the wage table, workers moving past her in orderly trust, and Elias at the far cask rack reviewing dispatch marks with the cellar dispatch clerk. The matron offered a brittle smile. "I had hoped to speak regarding the winter musicale." Ava capped her ink and looked up. "Submit dates to the office. We will review after pruning schedule." One of the ladies blinked as if she had been addressed in a language she did not expect from Ava. The matron inclined her head and withdrew. No one in line moved aside for them. When the last envelope was handed over and the hall emptied to the sounds of carts and distant pruning knives, Ava gathered the signed ledgers into 2 stacks. Wages released, corrections pending. She carried both to the estate office herself. Elias was already there, standing by the window with registry copies spread on the desk. "Did all disbursements clear?" he asked. "They did. Row 12 no longer pays twice." His mouth shifted. "Progress." She set the ledgers down and opened her reticule. From it she took her gloves, still neatly paired, and the aunt's restored letter pages softened at the folds. "These were returned," she said. So was this. She handed him the blank card. He read the line once and gave it back. "Keep it," he said. "You may need the memory." She placed the card inside the top ledger under her signature page. 3 months later, on a pale January afternoon, Ava stood again at the chapel door, not in borrowed certainty but in chosen steadiness. Snow lay thin along the vineyard walls, and wood smoke drifted from the press chimneys. There were no imported roses, no society rows arranged by rank. Mrs. Donnelly stood with Mrs. Hart near the front pew. Mr. Wren held the register. Thomas Hale had polished the chapel brass himself. Lucy, wrapped in a red scarf, sat between her parents drawing quietly on the back of a hymn sheet. Ava wore ivory wool trimmed with simple lace. No veil. Her father's watch did not return. She carried its absence honestly, paid into another family's winter. In her hand she held the aunt's letter, folded small, the missing pages now read enough times to live in her memory. Elias waited by the rail in dark coat, posture unadorned, the same man who had arrived in mud with a borrowed truck and a bandaged hand. When she reached him, his eyes met hers, hazel lit warm by candlelight. "Miss Thompson," he said, formal one last time. She answered, "Mr. Vale." The vicar began. They signed the marriage register in clear lines, each reading before the pen touched paper. When it was done, Elias turned toward her and spoke so only she could hear. "I saw you carry water into contempt," he said. "I knew then." Ava felt the chapel air settle around them, wood and wax and winter wool, ordinary and sacred at once. "I saw you open a door instead of closing it," she answered. "I knew then, too." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from guarded authority to something openly tender. He offered his arm. She took it. They stepped out together into the vineyard courtyard where the same old truck stood by the gate, newly washed but unmistakable, waiting to carry them home across land that no longer needed disguises.